So I got a story to tell. It was about 7 years ago, maybe 8 at this point. This nice lady named Sheila walked in to the Apple retail store in Summerlin in Las Vegas, Nevada, with a broken iPad. And it was myself and Jake Berry and David Masadi on the Apple retail team there working next to a server rack in the middle of a warehouse in a freezing room in the back. And I got introduced to the folks at Allegiant Airlines. And from there, we built up a good relationship, and I was actually the person that sold Allegiant Airlines Jamf Pro in the first place. So thank you, and I'm sorry. Mostly thank you, but hopefully it's been a great relationship. So I'm going to introduce my coworker Tim and Avery and Dan here from Allegiant. They're going to be talking about iPads today. So come on out.
Coming up. Here we go. Thanks. Hey, there we are. Hi, everyone. I'm Tim Knox. I am the Senior Consulting Engineer at Jamf that's focused on all of our industry solutions. That's iPads and iPhones and Apple TVs, and most recently, the Vision Pro, which is very exciting. I get to start messing around with some spatial computing stuff. Very cool, very fun things. I've been at Jamf for about 9 years. This is my 12th JNUC, and I've had the pleasure of being able to present a whole bunch. Hopefully everybody's enjoying your sessions so far. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Avery.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, this is my second JNUC. My first was 2019, so pretty awesome. First time speaking, though, so appreciate the invite, Tim. I am our lead Apple engineer at Allegiant Air. We handle all iPads, including the Macs and as well, so all Apple products for Jamf. And been around Apple since NASCAR days, doing entertainment, broadcast engineering, all the way up to healthcare. And there's even a little shout out to, I think Walter's out there from Children's. I used to work with him. And so we found the niche in mobility, and now I'm here with Allegiant, so helping out with our crew, pilots and flight attendants alike. I'm also served here by our CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, Dan Creed. We appreciate him coming. Without him, we wouldn't even be here today, so go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, glad to be here. You know, Apple is definitely an attack surface at Allegiant. It's, especially in the aviation industry, it's very heavily used by flight crews. You know, and I think storytelling is an important part of IT leadership, and I encourage all of my people to learn that skill. And as part of that, I'm kind of here to support Avery, and so be gentle and kind to him. I think this is the first time speaking publicly like this at a conference, and I'm going to hand it over to Avery.
Thank you so much, Dan. Appreciate your support.
Awesome.
And I'm screaming all on the inside, but here, go ahead, Tim.
We appreciate you coming, and thank you, and I know we'll call on you later. All right, so what we're here to talk about today is iOS deployments specifically. We're going to talk about talking to the crew at Allegiant Air about their deployments of iPads to their flight staff. Now, the flight staff are using these devices as electronic flight bags, or EFBs. We'll probably use that initialism quite a bit today. And we're going to talk about some of the common problems that happen with devices being deployed in areas that almost certainly don't have local IT teams where those devices are actually being stored. And they definitely don't have local IT when they're 30,000 feet up in the air with no help at all. So how do you get those deployments set in a way that can be scalable and repeatable, and something that can be done good for the people who are using the devices and good for the folks who have to support those devices, because we need to be able to sure we balance both of those things. And you know, if anybody here is doing their own deployments, we all share the same limitations with these kinds of devices. We need to be able to know who's using them. Ideally, we'd love to know where they are. We'd like to make sure that their batteries are charged, they're up to date, we would run the right apps, they have the right charts on the devices, all of those things that may not be specific to you if you're not from the airlines, but may be applicable to you if you're running a retail store or if you're in the hospital system. We all share the same kind of experiences here. So there are some limitations that we all have. So we're going to talk about how things got started and why Avery and his team decided to move into automation, using specifically, I'm just going to mention APU briefly. I think you talk about it in the future, but Apple Provisioning Utility, which is another initialism we'll probably use quite a bit, or APU, that allows you to do some scripting on a Mac to an iOS device. And we're going to show parts of those scripts too. So there will be some actions on the screens that are scripted that we encourage you to use or investigate, and maybe we can even share some of those scripts with some folks a little bit later on. All right, if we get through all of that, we'll talk about what the next steps are and answer some questions. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things we've seen at Jamf deploying devices at retail locations, airports, hospitals, schools, all over the place. And I've been very lucky, kind of lucky, to be involved in some of the biggest and most complicated things that we've done at Jamf. And I've seen things, let me tell you that. But being able to keep things up to date and being able to understand where they are in the process of provisioning has been some of the bigger challenges, which I think we've been able to solve with Avery and his team. And there are a lot of benefits to using iPads and iPhones as job-specific tools. So, if you're not looking at iPads or iPhones in your world, which I'm not sure why you would be here if you're not, but if you are, let's talk about how that can be done in a really repeatable and cool way. Okay, so I want to talk to Avery about where you started, where you came from, how do we do this? I'm going to hand you the clicker, and we'll start talking about what it looked like.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate that, Tim. And basically, just from our basic model of how Allegiant works, we use, with our crew members, the flight attendants and the pilots, they use the EFB or the electronic flight bags, and we use iPads. So with that being said, we have to deploy these iPads and we have to make sure they work. But the problem is that we have over 24 bases across the country but we live in Las Vegas. So what happens if something goes wrong with one of these devices? Well, we have partnered with a company called Lock and Charge using their smart lockers, if you will, to be able to inventory on-demand devices. And so that's basically what we use in order to instantly recover an iPad in the field that needs to be used so that our flights can be on time. Well, with that being said, these lockers are really just dummy lockers. The only thing that's really smart about them at the time was, hey, we can remotely log into that locker and unlock a device unlock a slot number so that we can access the device and do a swap. However, that didn't cover us in other areas, such as, what do we do for provisioning? What do we do for making sure that the apps are on there? And then what about updates? There's a lot of manual work that came into picture. But while we're talking about that, how do we do the provisioning of user setup? Well, as you can see on the screen, we use user remote setup assist, which is from Apple, right? A lot of people use this, still a good option today for some, but for us, we used it and it was great, but what happens is on-demand apps install. So everything was getting provisioned on hand, which meant more time for the pilot or the flight attendant to recover, right? So, the longer the time it took, the more it hindered operation and potentially caused a flight delay. So what we had to do is look towards other solutions. And what was nice about it is we also was transitioning to Jamf Cloud. So we actually had to architect from the ground up how we were going to redeploy our workflows. And obviously we wanted to also think about Apple updates as well, which is a huge nightmare for us because how did we do it before? Well, we had to update everything in Las Vegas and then ship it all across the country. And that took a lot of resources and a lot of money.
Yeah.
So what do we do? Well, as he kind of slightly introduced earlier, we use Apple Provisioning Utility. And that's what we use to look at. We looked at that product. We talked to Apple about that. And really the simplest thing we were just trying to do was just simply keep the device up to date. That's it. We just wanted to make sure, were they on the latest version of iPadOS? And that's all we really wanted initially. But then as we continued to look at our transition to Jamf Cloud and what we were doing as far as our existing workflows, we felt a need to get out of the user setup mode to get us to the home screen, which Apple Provisioning Utility used very well.
Right.
And also looking at other avenues that Apple Provisioning Utility offered us, now we can start looking at more automation.
Right. Because once you start being able to script things, then you can start opening up, well, what else can we script? If it's not just about getting these devices up to date and validating that and being able to understand it, like what else is out there? And that's what you help discover with APU.
Exactly. So just kind of looking at kind of a simplified architecture, here's the setup we have. We have a lock and charge device, which is a fuel tower. It's a 15-slot fuel tower And what's nice about it is they have an additional a cabinet. They call it a network kit. It's basically a 3U network cabinet, if you will. What we do is we put in a Cambrionix USB hub switch. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it, but it's kind of like the Mercedes of all USB hubs because they work very in tandem with Apple. Go ahead, Tim.
It's a nice hub. That's all I wanted to say.
Very expensive too. But we have this hub in there. Also, we put in a Mac Mini using a Sonnet chassis, rack mountable. And then also we put in a uninterruptible power supply, UPS system, 1U there to make sure we're supporting the Mac Mini in there. So all of this gets put in, and then we're using Jamf API to be able to talk to Jamf so that we can then relay all that information back to the device. So this is kind of how the flow works. Now, if you are familiar with APU, it uses Automator for workflows. So we're going to kind of show how that works, and basically all the steps you can see here, these are the steps in the workflow that we use purposely to try to get us through all of these particular automation steps. The first thing is we actually saw, we saw a need to be aware of what's going on. We got these across all of our bases. Well, we may not be able to look at each and every device. So we actually have the APU talking to Jamf through API to be able to say, hey, by the way, I'm provisioning this device. So after that, we go through an erase, update, we enroll the device using Jamf, and then we also gather the information using one of our workflows to be able to, or steps in our workflows, I should say, to be able to gather the information of what slot it's in and locations. And we're actually going to kind of, when we go under the hood, explain how that all works. And then at the end, we show that the device is ready. So here, let's
see it.
Let's look at a little demo here. And there we go. So basically, as you see here on the left, that's provisioning utility. That's the Apple software there that we're using to automate. And on the right, I kind of purposely put some things in that window where you could see our Cambrionix Connect, which is a nice representation of what Cambrionix can actually see, and you probably even see there it has a little battery emblem and actually gives some pretty good health things, especially for an iPad. That's pretty unique. But also we have Apple Configurator up there just in case there's any transitional issues with the iPad, so Finder doesn't pop up on us. But as you can see, it goes through each step, and then when it's finished, you'll see a checkbox or a little indicator that shows the affirmative that it's finished. But it's nice because we go through each and every step. And there was one step I did forget to mention. There is a step right before it's ready. It does ensure the device is charged to a 90%, which is big for us. That's actually a regulatory item that we have to make sure is done as well. So we make sure the device is charged so that way when it's ready, it can actually be used right away on the aircraft.
So the screen on the far side from me is the APU workflow, which shows all of the steps that it takes in order to wipe it, to clear it, to update it, and validate that the battery is up to whatever level it needs to be. And at the top is the configurator, and then we got the Cambrionix. And all of those things, I'm at a shot here, all of those things are all talking to each other, and they're all talking to Jamf.
Yes.
So everybody knows everything about everything.
Exactly, and that's what's kind of nice. If you can script it on the Mac, we can talk to Jamf. We can basically use Apple Configurator to put it all together.
Yeah.
So let's look under the hood a little bit, and we're going to examine really 5 areas, but 3 of them we're going to really show. The first thing is the first script shows us how it checks the device and updates an extension attribute, or EA, in Jamf that lets the device, or lets Jamf know that the device is kicking off for provisioning. Second, which is not shown in here, just to kind of give you that thought pattern, how do we erase, update, and prepare the device? Well, we make sure using CFG util, which is a binary of Apple Configurator that we use to be able to erase and also perform an update task in the background. And this is kind of nice and unique because there is an action for this in Apple provisioning utility, but CFG util allows us to script that out and maybe put in some guards just in case something fails. So that's kind of why we do that. And of course, we do the prepare action in CFG util to be able to enroll it, do an automated enrollment into Jamf using the device. But the fourth script that we're going to look at is how we update these extension attributes in Jamf with the port number or slot. So that's where we're going to kind of see how that all gels in together. And also the last one is where we'll get to see how it updates in Jamf what the status is that it's ready. So let's start with the first one. This first one is just an if else statement. Basically, our help desk has access to be able to see our inventory at all this so that if a flight attendant or a pilot calls asking for a swap, well, guess what? They get to figure out which device is ready, right? But if something's wrong, like let's say the device got cracked, damaged, they can flag that so that my team can then recover that device from the base back to headquarters to replenish or maybe get repaired depending on the situation. Well, that flag that we're giving help desk the option to do in Jamf, that's going to make sure that the automation doesn't tamper with that so that we can still see the device and recover it. Well, if that's not the case, well, then it just goes on to say the device is being prepared, it's being provisioned. So that's what this if-else statement is doing, and then we have the curl command that's sending that to the extension attribute that we have in Jamf. So now here, this is kind of interesting. So with the Cambrionix hub, that has an API as well. So what we do is we actually call that API using a curl command. There's actually different ways to do it. We chose curl. There's a Python script that you can use as well. But we use the curl command to get us the hub ID, the device ID for that specific hub, and then we can tell it, hey, give us in a JSON file all of the devices connected currently. And what we do is we use provision utility to tell us that serial, and then we compare it with whatever that is the case. Now, you could be asking me, well, how do you know what slot it's in? Well, we purposely have put all of the USB cables, because there's 16 ports on the Cambrionix switch, and there's 15 slots in the lock and charge locker. So we coordinate the port to align with the specific slot number, and we have cabled it accordingly. So meaning if a device is in slot number 1, it's on port 1, so on, so forth. So with that being said, we can actively look, based on the Cambrionix API, where that device lives inside the locker.
That feels like a lot of preparation. It feels like a lot of needing to plan all that stuff out, and it is. But once you have all that in place, you shouldn't be monkeying around in the back, like replugging things anyway that often. So stays where it is, and that little bit of preparation saves you a ton of time on the back end because you know where these devices are, which is really important. Not everybody knows where all the devices are.
Exactly. And so just in case you're wondering, well, I got all the devices, where does it live? I do a for loop. So that for loop will then go in and say, hey, does slot 1, does it have the serial I need? Yes, no. If so, it stores it in a variable, and then it makes sure that it reports that back to Jamf once we call that API, which is going to be on the next slide there.
So you got all the, you have all the slots, you have all the information, you know what's been plugged in, you know what needs to be serviced, you know which doesn't need to be serviced, you have all that information, and you've matched it all up to where it needs to be. And so then the next step is to just plop it where you can see it, where your Jamf admin can see it.
Exactly. So in this next slide, now we're showing you all that information. Now we're using Jamf API to call it back to Jamf. So we're doing a put command for ECID. We're also doing another put command with the slot number or port number, as we learned. And then also what I didn't share was we also have a naming convention for all of our Mac Minis. So that incorporates where it is. So if it's at, for instance, we're here in Nashville, BNA, well, that Mac Mini has BNA in the word, so we pulling that information, and there's the put command for that going into the building's attribute in Jamf.
You said ECID. Is there a reason why you use ECID and not UDID or serial number or anything like that?
Yeah, that's actually a good point as well. ECID is what Apple Provisioning Utility uses in order to actually elicit commands with Apple Provisioning Utility. So this has been an important part of how we script in Apple Provisioning Utility. So even when we're logging data, we're using ECID because that's how Apple is defining or uniquely identifying the device. So we thought it would be important for this to be in Jamf. So we actually made an extension attribute for that as well.
Cool.
And so now finally, we're looking again, just in case the help desk person forgot while they were doing the swap, because all this automation is going on. Hey, is it being returned? So it's checking one more time to see if, hey, we're not going to touch it. And then at the end of all the workflow, this is our script that says it's ready, and it actually goes into Jamf and puts it at a status of ready.
There you go.
And just in case you're wondering how it looks, since we're here in Nashville, we actually have a base here, so I've actually showed what our Jamf instance looked like for our inventory at one point for BNA. So as you can see here, there's numbers. That indicates the slot number of where that device lives. You also see on the right side, we have inventory status, which tells us that it's specifically in a fuel tower, because we also have different stages of an inventory, so it may be at headquarters. In this case, this is at our fuel tower. And then we also have that device is ready. It even shows us the device type. So as you can see, nobody can mistaken giving a flight attendant a pilot device or vice versa. So we have that all here.
And that's all just an advanced search. You can search by whatever base you're looking for. You can see the exact where everything is, what it's doing, where it is in its process, and have a better understanding about what your fleet looks like, depending on what specific part of that fleet you actually want to see, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and we have all these saved in our Jamf instance, so everybody can see what this is as well.
Hey, Avery, but I didn't see any kind of login. I didn't see any kind of security. What about security? I mean, I know Jamf aligns with us in that, these devices are mobile. They should always be on our network and in our security stack. They should have a zero trust mentality and things like supporting passwordless logins. What are you doing there?
Security guy's coming at me. I'm getting on the other side of you.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you had one of those heart-to-hearts with your security team, but he makes great points. Dan makes amazing points because we did talk about us using Apple's Setup Assist, which does include login, but we're bypassing that to get to the home screen. So we did have to find a way to identify and use some sort of IDP so that we could leverage that security piece. Well, that's where we use Jamf Setup. Jamf Setup is another piece of the puzzle that we had to use to really architect our new solution, especially using Jamf Cloud in mind. So we did use Jamf Setup, and what that enabled us to do was actually open up the door for us to be able to use SSO, because Jamf Setup uses Azure SSO, or Intra ID as it's known today, to be able to do identity management. And so we piggyback off that and be able to use our own SSO provider or IDP provider. And we also enabled MFA as well, which is something we couldn't do before. So it actually added more security to our process of provisioning.
Now, I have a lot of strong opinions about Jamf Setup, and I've talked about Jamf Setup at a lot of my last couple of JNUCs, and I promised myself I wasn't going to talk about Jamf Setup again on stage, but I'm doing it anyway because it works, because it's using it in production, and it is something that over the last 6 months or 7 months or so, for customers that are not Allegiant Air, we've been able to get the shared thing working in the way that we want it to. We have solutions for that that are a little bit more custom built, and we anticipate being able to have that in the product really soon. But having it in people's hands and having it being deployed and having it work, as somebody who's talked about Jamf Setup a lot in the past, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and it definitely has been, I remember when we were here at JNUC to see its inception, so it's came a long way. So
yes, it has.
I was very happy that we could start using that, especially knowing what it was capable of doing. So here, we're just showing how our new user setup was. Earlier, we showed a demo of how the user setup was using Apple's setup assistance. Now, here was our Jamf setup workflow using the person to be able to log in using their email address. Once they do log in, they are transferred into our MFA process. And then after that MFA process has been used, then they are then, depending on where they're at, what group they're in, we do use Active Directory groups heavily to provision devices. So depending on who it is, then we figure out, hey, this is a flight attendant, so we're going to provision it like a flight attendant. Especially with Jamf Setup, the whole purpose of Jamf Setup is for multi-use or shared device use workflows. Yep. But here we're just using it for our identity provider. So it's really helped piggybacking that. And as you can see here, boom, all the apps were there. So it's really allowed for a seamless process, because what's going on behind the scenes as it was being provisioned, all the apps were getting downloaded behind but being hidden. Right. So now they've logged in, apps are shown.
So instead of logging in through the Setup Assistant, once you have the device in hand with your flight team, and then waiting for the 20 gigabytes of data to be downloaded onto that device after they've gone through that initial process, that can be done in sort of a anonymized, staged way, and then the user can pick it up and log in, and then it can be deployed. You can just open it up.
Yep.
Super fast. Yeah.
Nice. So, oh, I have another one of these? Well, you're right. I forgot that because we use Active Directory groups, doesn't actually populate as soon as you log in. I don't know if you guys knew this, but Tim, did you want to elaborate on that?
So there was a PI that was when you would populate a name, a username into the username field, it was supposed to do an LDAP lookup and then do everything that was mapped would just get mapped and you would be able to do all those scoping. That was a problem. It is fixed in the most current build. So I've tested it a whole bunch. You drop a username in there, and then all the stuff maps the way you want it to map. It was a known issue, and we think it's solved, so yay.
I mean, at the time we built this, it wasn't fixed.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it
but
just
you got to
fixed.
work around the problems when they come across them.
All right, but no, we did have to figure out how to solve this issue because this was very important, and we just got on cloud a year ago, so it was something we couldn't wait on. So with that being said, we introduced another application called JAWA. It's called
Chris Ball out there? Yes, I do. Hey, Chris Ball.
Chris, shout out to Chris. This is his pet project, and we were very happy to get his help in making sure we can implement this in our environment. JAWA stands for Jamf Automated Webhook Assistance, and this particular app allows us to use Jamf's webhook REST API, sorry, a lot of words there, to be able to then talk to this JAWA server, and then using automation and scripting, we can then shoot back to Jamf with instructions via this API as well. So with that being said, as you can see, here is some of the steps we use in order for us to use this. We check to see if the device is newly enrolled, which means does it have a user attached to it or not. Once we do that, then that smart group trigger is what we use as the webhook trigger in order for it to talk to the JAWA server. And then once it does see that this device has been in this category, then it runs a script that basically goes out and resets all the Jamf attribute properties and also clear the passcode if necessary, just little cleanup things, and then it does an update inventory, which is really the bread and butter of what we needed to do at that time. So let me show you under the hood a little bit. Here's some more scripts. If anybody was tired of seeing them, sorry.
Too bad.
But this, so I just kind of described what I would call a login function, right? So we're seeing a device that hasn't been logged in yet. It's about to be logged in. So now the device has a user attached to it. So it elicits that trigger. And what we're doing here is we're doing a delete curl command to Jamf for any failed commands that could be there, which is, again, a cleanup function. But the bread and butter here is the post command to do the update inventory. I don't know how many of you, when they do an update inventory, they do send blank push, but we're going to do that right after. So we do the blank push. And then we also do a inventory status, which is kind of nice because before we really didn't know where the device was in its life cycle with inventory. But now we have a sure automated way to know that the device is actively in a use of a hand. So this attribute actually pushes that the device is active. And so when security asks me, hey, where is this device at and who has it, we know right offhand we can filter that into a report. But we have one more thing.
Yeah, you thought we're not done with scripts yet.
Well, I don't know if you guys, again, know that for re-enrollment, there is a limitation. We use Active Directory attributes in order for us to put in an extension attribute. But on re-enrollment, you can clear a lot of things. You can't clear directory attributes. So that was a big deal for us too, because if we're going to re-provision the device or even re-enroll it, meaning it's been erased, we want Jamf to treat it cleanly.
Yep.
So,
and it says right in re-enrollment, right in the, you go to settings and user or re-enrollment section, it says that it will not clear information that was populated in extension attributes via LDAP.
exactly.
It just doesn't do it.
So
we did this.
Is a limitation. So we had to figure out what that was as well, because we do use Jamf reset or to wipe the device. We don't use it as a logout function, but it is truly similar. So here's another script that we use to then put a Jamf command to clear Active Directory groups, because what we're now looking for is a smart group that looks at if there is no user but there is values in all the directory attributes. So if it shows that, it triggers JAWA to then come back and clear those attributes. And that's what we're doing here. Once we do the clear command, we also clear the Jamf Setup role, which if you're familiar with how Jamf Setup works, it uses a role, so we clear that too, because again, not needed. And then we also do a clear device passcode, because at that point, the device is needing to be logged into, so it has no need for a passcode at that point. And that's pretty much our solution. Those are the building blocks that we did in order to build out an architect of a solution that would not only create better provisioning and onboarding for all our users, but create some sort of automation to help streamline what's in these towers, where everything is, and now come to a point where we have a little bit more awareness and even more of a platform to grow, if you will, to do more automation with our mobile devices.
And both the flight teams have a better experience because they can log in with a known username and password after all the apps have already been logged in, so they're not waiting. The teams who are the admins who are in the central IT or wherever it is you're working from, they have a visibility where the devices are, at least where they started, who's using it, and whether the device needs to be fixed or is broken. Everybody has much clearer information about where it is, and things that would normally take a whole bunch of taps on the screen or clicks into Jamf is all just handled through just repeated robotic action, which is way more reliable than humans.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
let's talk about what's next. I have some questions, and I know we're going to open up to questions here in a second because we nailed this right on time, which is excellent.
Excellent.
We know that APU is going away. Apple Provisioning Utility is being replaced. It is going to be used in something called, it's been turned into shortcuts, essentially. So I know that the Apple team is helping you with that. I'm going to give a small plug for something at Jamf before you talk about that, which is Jamf Concepts. It's a website you can go to that has some things like we've wrapped up a lot of our API endpoints, our MDM commands, into draggable, droppable shortcuts. So if you wanted to be able to do APU-style actions in a very draggable, droppable kind of way, Jamf Concepts will get you to Jamf Actions, which will allow you to do all of that sort of thing. And if you want to talk to me about it anytime, feel free. And so yeah, that's APU. So that's the big one. What are you guys doing about your potential end of life for APU?
Yeah, right now we are working extensively with Apple with making sure that we can transition to shortcuts. Right now with Sequoia just coming out, it actually is very much more aligned with how APU works today than it did when Sonoma, shortcuts came out for Sonoma. So we're starting to look more into it seriously now than we did maybe a year ago. But that is something we're going to have to go to. Now, Apple does say that they're still going to do support through Sequoia. So we're hoping that gives us enough time to transition, depending on if they support it for the next OS next year.
But the plan is to move over from one of the other. All right, cool.
Yeah.
And I see you have self-service initiatives on here. This is probably before we were able to talk about Self-Service Plus, which got announced earlier today.
What a
so
new
I'm
plug.
sure you don't have anything to plan as far as Self-Service Plus, but you are thinking about adding or changing some stuff in self-service. Is that a thought?
Well, actually, the whole point is every time something goes wrong with our devices, they have to call our help desk to be able to do a swap. What we're hoping is now that there's more information that we know about the device and where the status is, that maybe we can get away from our help desk having to take the call and have to physically change it. So we're looking into those initiatives. As also more in with the Lock and Charge API. That's kind of why I have that as a sub-bullet, because Lock and Charge has capabilities to interact with the lights and the automation there. So that's something we're going to look into, and it's a little bit of a far away distance, but we're going to see what we can do to get into that. Yeah. And also a big thing, especially for aviation, is siloading apps to better provision. So there's still, even though we have apps on there, there's still data for those apps. So we're hoping, because again, we're touching the device using a Mac Mini, that we have options there that can be opened up. And then one big thing, especially for iPad OS users in any industry, is battery health awareness. We're hoping maybe we could tap into that more, and use of the Cambrionix. That's why I plugged that in earlier. So those are just some of the few things that we're looking at for future.
And for the folks in the room who aren't specific to the aviation industry, the app that people use for like their charts or the maintenance books, those are big. And so even though you've downloaded the app pretty fast, they generally don't download the charts and the things that are needed until after they've logged into that app. And so there's the ability to drag 20 gigs of data onto that device could be pretty handy.
Exactly.
Yeah, and also in the people in the retail space probably have the same exact experience with their inventory, needing to update their inventory on the point of sale systems or their inventory collection. There's tons of reasons why we would want that sort of thing. And then of course, battery health. Everybody wants to know battery health. That is a very common ask that we get.
Believe me, we still want it. So.
Yeah, I'm sure we do. So do we. I think that's everything from us. So first and foremost, thank you and thank you and thank you. But if there are questions or concerns, I got one right here. Yo, Sean, you wanna, or are we gonna shout out, or no? We gotta wait because this is being recorded somewhere, so we're gonna. Yeah, next question is gonna be way in the back.
Welcome to my life of JNUC.
Thank you. I've never heard of these Cambrionix devices before. I noticed they've got a couple of different tiers. I don't have any facilities that would require such a large device. Do you know if this works with their smaller devices that offer sync as well?
I'm not sure offhand. I haven't looked into their other products. My thought is their Cambrionix software, the Connect one that we saw on the demo, that one is used across multiple devices. So I would assume that it probably works with maybe more smaller ones, but you would have to reach out to them to get those details.
That API, the documentation for that API is out there. So it's a download. You can find it, and I'm sure I have their specs somewhere on my computer. So it should. I don't see any reason why that would be a hardware limitation. Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but APU doesn't respect like MDM deferrals. Do you just test very, very heavily when you're always going to the latest every time?
Well, that's a good question.
How do you handle that?
And you're talking about latest software, just to be clear?
Yeah, latest iOS. Every time it erases and updates, it's always going to the latest.
Oh, yeah.
There's no deferral.
And it's interesting, we just went through this with the latest iPad OS 18 update. So what I did was in the step for updating, I turned it off because, to your point, yes, unless you specify, again, we're using the CFG util binary for Apple Configurator. So if there is a way to specify or defer, that would be the way to do it. But knowing Apple, if they have taken off the signage for that specific IPSW,
Or whatever.
Yeah, they're going to want you to go to the most current one for sure.
so right now we've just bypassed it altogether just for the sake of, keeping things constant. Good question, though.
Yeah,
That's a
I hadn't thought about that.
issue we're running into.
Oh, we got one more? It's hard to see. Yep.
Ooh.
Can you leverage managed updates for that problem? So you could do a targeted iOS managed update. I mean, the device doesn't have a passcode, right? While it's going through this process with you guys.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I think the biggest issue is if it's a wipe that's happened, and then as it's being reprovisioned, it's probably going to want to grab the most current version. But yeah.
And I'm thinking he's talking about the new managed software update section for Jamf, right? Is that the specific one?
Yeah, I mean, I have devices that sit in a charging station, and because they're powered and online and don't have a passcode before the end user sign in, they're able to get those managed updates without end user interaction.
Yeah, that would be post APU, so that could work.
Yep.
I feel like you could probably work through that a little bit. It would take a little bit of architecting to kind of work through that, though, because then after you were finished, or before you would say the device was ready, you would have to probably call out to Jamf API for that specific one.
Oh, no. Yeah, you drop into a specific smart group, scope the DDM update command to that specific smart group. You could even schedule it at that point, or maybe have JAWA fire off a webhook to trigger that. I think it's a solvable problem.
Yeah, I think it's solvable. I'm just not sure how you would architect it at the moment.
Cool, thank you.
Good questions.
Yeah. How we doing, Sean? Oh, got one more. Oh, we got 6 minutes, so we are like spot on.
Cool. I think this is mainly for you, Tim. Did I hear that Jamf Setup is now fixed so the shared device mode actually works?
Yeah, so there's going to be 2 answers to that question. Yeah, yes and no. The consulting engineering team has built something that does allow for someone to do the auto registration of Authenticator into Entra, which does put that into shared mode with no user interaction at all. We are doing it at scale with customers right now. So that is a problem that we have solved. And it's something that if you want to use, hit me up. We'll get you hooked up. If you want to wait a little bit and take what we built there, and once they put it in a product, then that's cool too. But if you're down for trying something that we built, then yeah, let's hook you up.
Last call.
Really appreciate all the questions, and thank you, Avery, and thank you, Dan. Really glad to have you both here. Sean, thank you.
And thank you, Tim.
All right, thanks, everyone.
Appreciate it.
Nice work.